Welcome back to part 2, the history of capitalism and why poverty still exists. If you haven't checked out part 1, go back and do that. While you're here, hit the like button, sub button, bell button, and let us know what is your least favorite and most favorite part about capitalism in the comments below. Let's jump right into it. Another thing that happened in the 1970s was the emergence of a highly compartmentalized financial way of thinking about how to operate a business, balance sheet, minimize expenses, marshal money, and see labor costs rather than an asset. Companies aren't investing in their employees, and they aren't boosting salaries. So you're starting to see a huge X where Wall Street is heading one way and Main Street is heading another way. Germany and Japan followed a different path, putting workers on company boards and giving them more power. This provided them a significant edge. They were able to apply this knowledge to improve their efficiency, as a result acquire market share from U.S. firms. So in concluding that in order to promote an investment, we need to raise the Some of the theory behind this would happen if you let capitalism go was that you had to restrict labor power. You have to remember that there were 3 concerns with strikes at the time. The public was dissatisfied with the way that some labor units were operating at the time. There was a mandate to take action against labor's leverage over capital. And doing it properly is certainly a difficult task. This enormous anti-union sentiment begins in the 1980s and reaches a pinnacle when the Reagan dismisses all of the air traffic controllers. That was seen as a green light for the entire industry. What we've seen over time is that it's critical to understanding why inequality has become worse is that the percentage of the money created in the economy that goes to employees is decreasing, while the profit share, which is essentially what people who control the capital will get, is increasing. And it boils down to power. Greed is good. Gordon Gekko was captured in the video saying, and it was meant to be a cry of protest against the system. However, the cultural fabric had evolved to the point that the statement greed is good had become a license to chase riches for certain university graduates applying to investment banks. The yuppie age ushered forth a new era. It started to look really hip to be an entrepreneur, to be riding that wave, and a concept fighting for high taxes and redistribution started to feel extremely out of date. As the new dogma of deregulation gained traction, financial services were drastically deregulated. Bankers began to earn significantly more, and market forces were unleashed, making capitalists significantly wealthier. The Reagan-Thatcher era's major innovations were to reduce tax rates for the wealthy, with the expectation that this would trickle down to the rest of the population. Of course, it didn't work out. It was obvious that when they implemented these measures that they would exacerbate inequality. The promise was that the pie would grow in size and you received a lesser portion of larger pie, and that slice would grow in size. And in some ways, the increase in inequality was unsurprising. However, the growth of inequality was far bigger in size. We can see that quite clearly when we look at the data. The lowest 90% of the population has been in a state of near stagnation. The richest 10% of the population has reached the most benefits. A typical American household's median income is nearly the same as it was a quarter century ago. At the bottom, inflation-adjusted real earnings are at the same level as they were 60 years ago. In reality, life expectancy has been decreasing in the recent years. These are startling figures that suggest the economy isn't working for the majority of Americans. By the 1990s, American banks had transformed themselves into true exporters of American capitalism, with branches all across Europe and Asia. And everyone was sold on a vision of free market, laissez-faire capitalism. In the 1990s, life appeared to be getting better since the globalization of the system made goods cheaper for the average person for a while. Then you got credit on top of that. When the credit bubble exploded, regular people were suddenly able to obtain credit. Suddenly, even the poorest of individuals could receive credit. People with poor credit reports may be able to obtain credit. People who should not be eligible for a mortgage may be able to obtain one. Investment banks devise increasingly more sophisticated credit derivatives, which are techniques of dividing up your bad debt into masking its badness. That's what allowed the system to function for so long. And it all came to a head in 2008. When things start to fall apart, you start to worry. How widespread will this be? Are we on the cusp of another Great Depression? The collapse, however, did not occur. The system was perpetuated, and the potential to alter it in a significant way was passed up. As a result of these steps, the stock market dropped significantly and then rose strongly. Furthermore, because wealthy people have a lot of stock market exposure, they kept their jobs, kept their bonuses, Their businesses were not significantly disrupted, and they made more money through the stock appreciation, dividends, and expected dividends than they had in the previous couple of years. Elites have a tendency to capture democracies in general, and unless non-elites periodically rise up to revitalize democracy, it will continue to develop in this direction. Where power and riches become increasingly concentrated, there's now a layer of oligarchs all around the world who use their money to purchase political power. It would seem logical that the more of something you have, the more likely you are to share it with others. However, this does not appear to be the case in many other research. And an experiment invited strangers into a lab in pairs of two and selected who would be rich and who would be a bad player by flipping a coin. The rich player received 2 times the money to play the game, and they were allowed to roll both dice instead of just one, allowing them to move around the board much faster, which was important because when they moved around the board in past go, they would receive $200, whereas the poor player would receive $100. The players noticed that the disparity almost immediately. I mean, how could it not be? However, dynamics begin to correlate after just a few minutes, and the wealthy player began to act in an unusual manner. Players with lots of money get lots of power. Pretzel consumption is higher among the wealthier players. They get louder as they move their piece around the board. They begin slamming their pieces into the board. The affluent players were much more obnoxious. They were considerably more prone to brag about how well they were doing and dismiss the suffering of the struggling athletes. As a result, they became less sympathetic. These are the trends that we've noticed over and over and over again in hundreds of different people. People who win because of a coin flip begin to act as though they deserve to win. Why did you win the game? Is one of the questions they are asked, and can envision the wealthy players saying things like, well, I won the game because of that coin flip and I had 2-to-1 edge. However, none of the wealthy players described their unavoidable victory in the game to the stroke of luck that they had landed them in such a privileged position in the first place. People believe they're entitled to deserve of their own success, or more ready to prioritize their own interests above the interests of others. And they frequently engage in behaviors that damage other people's welfare in order to advance. And that has a nefarious societal ramification. But it's not about being wealthy. Rather than being substantially better off than someone else who appears to affect everyone or would influence everyone in the same manner. And when we in experiments actually get poor people, or we make poor people feel rich, again, the same pattern or the same results. We equate being better off monetarily than others to being better than others based on our opinions and our experiences. That translation appears to be made by the mind. What happens to the taxation when individuals live their whole life on aircraft in the first class and the safety net of the security system with the villa in the 3 or 4 different countries that they can flee to if things get a little too much? Large sums of money are shifted offshore as a result of this. Individuals and businesses have shifted their legal identities for decades in order to avoid paying tax that benefits their employers. So that when you walk out of one of these enormous fashionable IT business headquarters, you fall over, bang your head, and are lying in a pool of blood on the sidewalk, an ambulance arrives, and that has not been paid for in any way, shape, or form by that company's taxes. In terms of capitalism, that's a brand new system. It's also unsustainable, since in order for it to operate, the government needs to access the wealth of the wealthy through taxation. It just works considerably better for the capital holders than it does for the ordinary people. The big cash-rich internet companies in particular can put people and money anywhere they choose. They just flown 30,000 feet above the national security concerns. They produce significantly fewer employment than the previous large industrial business, but they make far more money. Globalization has brought people to the globe closer together, but it has also allowed firms in the developed world to steal employment and relocate them, making them a lot of money in the process. On the side, the working and middle class, which were famously prosperous, have seen their quality of life and possibilities eroded, and their governments and corporations have done very little, in some cases, nothing at all, to address the problem. Because of globalization, the United States and Europe are far more divided. India, the Philippines, and China, on the other hand, are not. People in China think that if they work hard, their children would have a better life, which is probably accurate. However, in the United States, this is no longer the case. If you visit Beijing, Shenzhen, Shanghai, Guangzhou, or any of these other wealthier Chinese cities that they have made, Shanghai, for example, has a per capita income higher than Portugal. You will meet middle-class Chinese. And I don't mean middle-class in the Chinese sense. And that in China is nothing like what you saw even 10 years ago. China is on the verge of becoming the world's greatest economy. and it will be within the next decade, but it will remain a state-owned enterprise. Hundreds of millions of people are also impoverished, yet they support state capitalism. It's all right with them as long as they can earn enough money to provide for better opportunities for their children. The unrestricted flow of global money is essential to the modern capitalism, and the financial system has evolved significantly during the previous 40 years. The financial industry has nearly doubled in size, a share of GDP, resulting in a slower growth rather than quicker. Adam Smith, the creator of the modern capitalism, lives in a radically different environment when he conceived of the free market system. If Adam Smith were time traveling, I believe he would have no clue what would make the market too large to fail. Banks or multinational corporations doing business in 120 different countries, each with its own regulation structure. It's a whole new world out there. Thanks for watching the video. Hit the like button, sub button, bell button. See you next time.